Hi everyone, my name is Woosuk, a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan. I'm excited to present to you our recent project titled ChaCha, Leveraging Large Language Models to Prompt Children to Share Their Emotions About Personal Events. This work is conducted with my amazing collaborators, Dr. Yang, who is a child psychiatrist, and Young-ho, who was my research mentor during my internship at Naver AI Lab. Children gradually learn to recognize their emotions and develop emotion management skills through communication with others. However, it is often challenging to communicate about their emotions. Particularly, children aged 8 to 12 are old enough to have preferences or opinions, but still have challenges expressing them. Thus, researchers have developed technologies for promoting children's emotional regulation. For instance, two mobile apps adopted a gamification approach to educating emotional recognition and management. Also, a rule-based chatbot used storytelling strategies to identify children's emotions by asking predefined questions. However, these technologies primarily focus on detecting children's emotions and educating management skills. Understanding children's stories behind their feelings and increasing children's awareness about sharing emotions are often overlooked. Motivated by these prior works, we envisioned an AI-driven chatbot that facilitates emotional communication with children. Particularly, large language models can enable free-form conversations, which allows children to communicate their emotions more openly rather than simply answering questions. Informed by the formative interviews with 6 child mental health professionals and prior studies of emotional communication with children, we identified 3 design rationales for a chatbot. First, a chatbot should empathize with children from their perspectives. Second, a chatbot should support children to explore a range of emotions. Third, a chatbot should guide children rather than judge. Based on these rationales, we developed ChaCha, a LLM-driven chatbot on a web app. ChaCha has a peer persona to encourage children to share their experience openly. And it provides options for emotional words so that children can easily choose their feelings. To better steer emotional conversations, we also use LLMs for response generators and conversation analyzers. ChaCha's conversation flow consists of 5 phases, and each phase has individual response generator and analyzer. Here is the overview of the 5 conversation phases and phase transitions. The nodes represent the phases, and the task indicates the analyzers. First, the conversation begins by getting the user's name and age as input. In the Explore phase, ChaCha first builds common ground with the user by asking about their hobbies and interests. Then it asks the user about their day or present experience to identify a key event. Once a key event is identified, ChaCha helps the child label their emotions associated with the event in the label phase. If at least one negative emotion is identified, ChaCha moves to the find phase, in which ChaCha helps the user to develop or identify ways to alleviate negative emotions. On the other hand, if the user experiences positive emotions only, the phase moves to the record, in which ChaCha encourages them to record the moment to record their positive experience. The last phase is share, where ChaCha asks and discusses the idea of sharing the emotions with the child's parents. Then ChaCha asks if the child wants to share a new event or experience. If not, the conversation ends here. If they do, it goes back to the Explorer phase. For implementation, we use Python as the core mechanism of ChaCha. We used OpenAI's GPT-4 for response generators and 3.5 for conversation analyzers. The web interface was built with React, And for more technical details, please check our source code on GitHub that I will share at the end of this talk. Here is a sample conversation of ChaCha. Once it identifies a key event, it moves from explore to the live phase and asks the child about their emotions. To support the child with expressing their emotions, ChaCha also provides emotional words the child can choose from. To examine how children interact with ChaCha, we conducted a lab-based in-person user study. The inclusion criteria for participants were children aged 8 to 12 who do not have any difficulties typing on smartphones. We posted a screening questionnaire to a local community platform targeting the parents of potential study participants. We recruited 20 children in total and invited them and their parents to our lab. Each study session consists of 3 parts. First, we briefly explain the study overview to the participants in age-appropriate language. We then obtained their signed assent and consent from their parent. Next, we gave the participants a smartphone and asked them to converse with ChaCha for maximum 30 minutes. We also told them that they could stop the conversation at any time. After the conversation, we had interviews with the participants asking about their overall experience with interacting with ChaCha and their perception of ChaCha. For data analysis, we computed descriptive statistics from the conversation dataset collected, such as the total number of turns per session. We also categorized the conversation turns with bottom-up codes. We identified 2x4 total of 8 categories. We then performed open coding to identify the meanings of each conversation turn. Next, we coded interview transcripts with thematic analysis. We identified emerging themes and connected them with the data from conversation logs. Based on the analysis, we identified 3 key findings: identified key events emotions, conversation patterns between the participants and ChaCha, and participants' perception of ChaCha. First, children shared various events and associated emotions. The major categories of the events were written trips, personal achievements, concerns, and hobbies. They also shared multiple emotions about a given event. Participants either typed out their emotions or chose emotional words from the list that ChaCha provided. In some cases, ChaCha asked participants to explain the meaning of the emotion they typed out, such as simple pleasure. Next, we analyzed conversation logs to understand ChaCha's behavior patterns. Based on the 8 categories shown here, we calculated the ratio of messages per phase. This graph shows what types of messages ChaCha and participants asked and expressed for each phase. In Explorer phase, ChaCha asked children about their hobbies and interests, as well as expressing its traits. Particularly, ChaCha restated children's hobbies or experiences to build common ground with them. For example, Jin shared his experience with riding a roller coaster. Then ChaCha built common ground by sharing a similar experience about riding a roller coaster for the first time. Also, in the share phase, a few participants asked ChaCha about its experience, preferences, or emotions. One major reason for asking such questions was to learn more about ChaCha and build common ground with it. Since ChaCha's instructions were not designed to handle such unexpected questions, it improvised its answers. For instance, Jisoo shares that her dream job is to become a lawyer, and asks ChaCha about its dream. Then, ChaCha shares its dream to be a person who listens to others' stories. And then it facilitates the conversation back to the flow by asking her about the region experience. Next, we found that all participants perceived ChaCha as a close friend with whom they wanted to share their emotions. Some of them even preferred sharing emotions with ChaCha to their parents. This indicates that ChaCha successfully built rapport with children and explored their experience and associated emotions. In addition, ChaCha's conversation skills in talking about emotions encourages many participants to learn and apply these skills to their conversation with their family members or friends. For instance, a 9-year-old girl mentioned that she would talk to more about emotions with her family members since she felt more confident after interacting with ChaCha. Based on our findings, we suggest three considerations for designing a safe and reliable LLM-driven chatbot for facilitating emotional conversations with children. First, we found two benefits of leveraging LLMs. LLMs enable chatbots to facilitate more empathetic conversation with children by building common grounds. LLMs enable ChaCha to recognize the context of children's experience better and show empathy, which helps them define their emotions. Second, LLMs enable chatbots to steer the conversation flow with children's response to various topics. Even when the child asks unexpected questions, ChaCha improvises their answer and redirects the conversation back to the current conversation phase. Despite the benefit of using LLMs, our research has also identified a couple of challenges, particularly in long-term engagement. First, long-term interactions with chatbots can lead to inconsistent behavior. For example, a chatbot like ChaCha might give different answers to the same question over time, eventually making children less interested in interacting with it or losing children's trust. Additionally, there is a risk they might produce harmful responses. This can happen in two ways. First, if the chatbot says something explicitly toxic, and second, if it gives a response that can be subtly harmful considering the specific context or a particular child's circumstances. In addition, we also suggest that LLM-driven chatbots for children should consider how parents expect chatbots to behave and how they may intervene in child-chatbot interactions. In our findings, some participants prefer sharing emotions with ChaCha to parents. This preference may cause tension between children and parents, similar to online safety and parental surveillance in mobile apps. Hence, we believe developing LLM-driven chatbots for children should incorporate parents' expectations and potential concerns, even if they are not primary end users. To sum up, we suggest that developers and researchers should consider both benefits and potential issues of leveraging LLMs to design a chatbot for children. Particularly, further studies are necessary for how to evaluate LLM-driven chatbots for children. Also, chatbots should support the parent-child relationship by preventing potential over-reliance on the chatbot. As we design chatbot ChaCha as a supplementary tool rather than replacing parents' role, we believe other LLM-driven chatbots should also focus on enhancing the parent-child relationship and minimizing potential tensions between them. I'd like to thank you all for your attention. For more details about this project and source code, please visit the project website. Thank you.